Have you ever noticed how people who grew up in the 1990s carry themselves differently? There's something about them that feels both nostalgic and grounded. Not loud, not rushed, just steady. It's as if they remember a version of the world that no longer exists, and yet they function perfectly inside the one we live in now. People who grew up in the 90s are often called the bridge generation. They didn't grow up online, but they learned to live there. They remember childhood without constant documentation. No stories, no feeds, no pressure to perform moments instead of living them. Their early years were quiet in a way that's hard to explain today. Afternoons stretched longer. Boredom wasn't a problem, it was an invitation. You didn't capture moments, you experienced them, then let them fade. And that matters more than we realize. Because psychology isn't just shaped by personality, it's shaped by timing, by what the world asks of you when your mind is still forming. People from the 90s grew up before life was optimized, tracked, and archived. They learned how to exist without an audience, how to entertain themselves, how to sit with silence without trying to fill it immediately. Then, as they got older, the world changed. Technology arrived quickly. Suddenly, everything sped up, and instead of breaking, they adopted. That's what makes this generation psychologically unique. They didn't choose between two worlds, they learned both. And today, that shows in how they communicate, how they relate to technology, and how they move through life with a quiet balance that feels increasingly rare. People who grew up in the 1990s didn't just experience childhood, they experienced a transition. They remember a time when life wasn't optimized, when communication took effort, when plans had to be made in advance, not adjusted in real time. If you wanted to talk to a friend, you called their house, and sometimes you had to talk to their parents first. If you wanted to watch something, you had to be there when it aired. If you missed it, it was gone. This shaped something subtle but powerful in the 90s mind: presence. Moments mattered because they couldn't be paused, replayed, or documented. There were no backups, no screenshots, no archives of childhood stored online. Boredom wasn't something you escaped, it was something you solved, with imagination, with creativity, with movement. Psychologically, this created a generation that learned how to sit with time, how to wait, how to anticipate. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. The internet arrived, phones got smaller, messages became instant, information became infinite. And the 90s generation stood right in the middle of that shift. They weren't raised by algorithms, but they learned to live with them. They didn't grow up online, but they adopted to being connected. This is why their relationship with technology feels different. They use it, they understand it, but they don't fully belong to it. They remember what life felt like before constant access, and that memory still shapes how they move through the world today. What truly sets people who grew up in the 1990s apart is not nostalgia, it's perspective. They didn't just adapt to change, they watched the world transform in real time. They remember writing notes by hand, then slowly switching to text messages, calling a friend's house and awkwardly talking to their parents before reaching them, waiting for photos to be developed instead of instantly reviewed and deleted. They lived through the moment privacy stopped being the default and sharing became an expectation. This created something psychologists often describe as psychological duality, a rare ability to hold two worlds at once. People from the 90s can appreciate silence without feeling lonely. They can sit with boredom without panicking. But they can also navigate technology with ease, speed, and fluency. They're not overwhelmed by constant connection because they remember a time when connection was intentional. They understand the value of presence because they learned it before distraction became automatic. And they understand digital life because they grew into it rather than being born inside it. This is why they often feel balanced in conversations. They listen without checking their phone. They communicate clearly without oversharing. They don't confuse attention with connection. They're not trying to escape modern life, and they're not chasing every new trend either. They simply learned that progress doesn't require losing yourself. Growing up during the transition taught them something subtle but powerful, that tools should serve life, not replace it. And not awareness still shapes how they move through relationships, work, and identity today. What truly sets people who grew up in the 1990s apart is not nostalgia, it's duality. They didn't just live through change, they felt it happen. They remember a world where privacy was default, not a feature you had to turn on. Where mistakes faded with time instead of being archived forever. Where moments existed simply because they happened, not because they were shared. And then, slowly, that world disappeared. The 90s generation witnessed the exact moment when life became faster, louder, and more visible. They remember handwritten notes turning into instant messages, phone calls turning into texts, waiting turning into immediacy. This created a unique psychological balance. They learned how to be alone without feeling lonely, how to sit in silence without reaching for distraction. But they also learned how to adapt quickly. That's why people from the 90s often feel emotionally grounded yet flexible. They can disconnect without panic. They can engage online without losing themselves. Psychologically, this creates a rare skill, context awareness. They know when speed is useful and when slowness is necessary. They don't confuse constant communication with real connection. They value depth because they experienced life before everything became surface level. But they aren't resistant to change because they learned early that the world doesn't wait. This is why they often feel slightly out of place, not behind, not ahead, just balanced. They're comfortable living between worlds, between analog and digital, between presence and progress. And that balance quietly shapes how they think, love, work, and move through life, even today. What truly sets people who grew up in the 1990s apart isn't nostalgia, it's perspective. They don't romanticize the past blindly, and they don't worship the future either. They remember a time when life moved slower, and they understand why speed isn't always progress. This generation learned how to be alone without feeling lonely, how to wait without feeling anxious, how to enjoy moments without needing proof that they happened. They weren't raised to document their lives, they were raised to live them. That's why many people from the 90s feel grounded in a world that feels constantly overstimulated. They know how to unplug, not because it's trendy, but because they've done it before. They know how to connect, not just digitally, but emotionally. Their calm isn't weakness, it's experience. They grew up solving small problems on their own, and those small moments quietly shaped confidence, patience, and resilience. Maybe that's why they don't rush everything, why they're okay with silence, why they can sit with discomfort without immediately escaping it. They understand that not every moment needs to be shared. Not every feeling needs an audience. Not every thought needs a reaction. And in a world that constantly demands attention, that kind of restraint is powerful. So if you grew up in the 90s and sometimes feel out of place in today's pace, it doesn't mean you're behind. It means you remember something many people never experienced, a version of life where presence mattered more than performance, where anticipation was part of joy, where growing up wasn't rushed. And maybe that's not something to outgrow, but something to protect.